Hello everybody, Play-Doh Bear here, and today we're going to have a quick little PSA on two topics that I'm seeing popping up on Reddit as well as on YouTube. And these two topics are damage mitigation and Borealis Inconsistency. The first one, we're going to focus on damage mitigation and why it does not exist in the game's current state. So, way back in the day, to not spend too much time on it, there was a bug with a popular defensive mod called Emergency Stance. When once procced, that buff would stay on indefinitely unless your character had died or you had returned to lobby. You could even swap out the mod for a damage mod and still keep the effects. So when this bug was fixed by PCF, when Emergency Stance was fixed, was when people were noticing that there was some sort of damage mitigation bug being happened. But you have to account that Emergency Stance gives you Golem for 4 seconds when you're below 30% HP. And Golem gives you 65% damage reduction from all sources. We're not just talking about physical, we're talking about anomaly as well. Riflemen, breachers, anomaly barrages from Captain Elite's, Broodmother, Surges, Toxic, Explosive Barrels, you name it. All of those damage types did 65% less damage, and it was active at all times. This is when players started noticing how valuable Emergency Stance was, because players started noticing that they were getting one-shot more often. There were posts on Reddit and YouTube videos about this as well, and it caused PCF to look into it a little bit more further, and they actually did notice that there were some instances where damage mitigation from armor was not registering, and that was causing players to take more damage than intended. And sometimes Broodmothers was able to one-shot you, which they fixed with a patch that came a few weeks later. But it wasn't like this outcry of holy shit, now I just can't play the game anymore. It's just players had to readjust to Emergency Stance being fixed. But that did, show some concerns that there was something going wrong with armor, but that has all been resolved now. It's no longer an issue. Now, during this time, there were also reports of players seeing that their character screens were splashing red when they were in the lobby, trying to switch characters and get into a game. Now, this is just a visual bug, and this was confirmed by thearcan as well, but this was also an indicator that players had thought was a sign of the damage mitigation bug still being present or was never really fixed. I mention this because I see a lot of new players or returning players mention and comment about this still happening in New Horizon. This is just a visual bug. The damage mitigation bug is not back. As someone who's played the game ever since launch, after they fixed the damage mitigation and still no lifing it after New Horizon, I have not noticed the damage mitigation bug being back in any way sort. It's just, sometimes you just get one shot. And speaking of getting one shot, let's move to the next section. Moving forward, this game actually has a few ways you can prevent death, by primary death prevention, secondary death prevention, and spike damage protection. Basically, what primary death prevention does is it prevents your health from dropping below 30% HP due to incoming damage, and when triggered, it'll block damage from all sources for 1.2 seconds and prevent hit reactions. Now, this mechanic has a 120-second cooldown. So basically what happens is this mechanic will only trigger and go into cooldown when a character reaches 30% HP for the first time, while primary death prevention is not on cooldown. So if an attack were to take a character below 30% HP, this mechanic will only take the character 30% HP, and the remaining damage will be disregarded. Remember, this is for 1.2 seconds, so you still have to react very fast. If you weren't able to react past that 1.2 seconds, you go into secondary death prevention. While it works similarly to primary death prevention, this prevents you from dropping below 10% HP due to incoming damage, and when triggered, it'll block all damage and hit reactions for 2.1 seconds. So you basically have 3.3 seconds of death prevention. Similar to primary death prevention, it'll prevent you from going below 10% and will only take into effect when it is not on cooldown, and all of the damage you take after that will be disregarded. Moving forward to spike damage protection, if a single hit takes more than 65% of a player's max HP, the value is limited to just that 65%. Now this increases to 84.5% by challenge tier 15. So what does this mean? This means that the enemies on higher tiers will be able to deal higher max damage per individual hit to players before this damage protection, the spike damage protection applies. And don't also forget that the initial damage output of enemies also scales up with each tier that you progress through. So this is intended as PCF and the devs want you to assemble a complete build that includes adequate protection from damage spikes through resistance, armor, or both. And they really want you to master enemy behavior, attack patterns in order to better dodge abilities and mitigate damage from them. And I want to add, knowing the map layouts and the spawn layouts will definitely help on this regard as well. Great thing about spike damage protection is that it has no cooldown, so it counts for every hit. However, certain bosses, attacks can be very deadly, regardless of this damage protection being here, and should be avoided or dodged whenever possible. They give you examples like the Crystalloid's Breath Attack and the Broodmother's Anomaly Surge, but I'm gonna add motherfucking Dr. D, Moloch, the Paxian Homestead Homie, and the fucking Shaman from the Wellspring. They all apply to this spike damage protection where they could literally just one-shot you. If the primary death prevention and secondary death prevention is on cooldown. Here's going to be a quick example of how this primary death prevention and secondary death prevention is in action. Apologies, I didn't have an example for spike damage protection. I figured it was more important to show primary and secondary. Take a look. Looking at those examples, you saw when my character went into the first stage of death prevention, where it took me to 30% HP, and for 1.2 seconds, I was kind of just chilling there until secondary death prevention proc, which took me to 10% of my HP, and I was just kind of chilling there as well. I immediately shot the rifleman, got some HP back. Now note that both primary death and secondary death prevention is now on cooldown. So when I got all my HP back throughout the rest of the clip, you saw me go to legitimately 2 cutthroats. I just let them melee me, stood still, and I instantly died. So when primary death and secondary death prevention is on cooldown, that is when a lot of you will be noticing the one-shotting that you are noticing. It is not a damage mitigation bug. You're not taking more damage than the game intended. You're just in the cooldown of primary death prevention and secondary death prevention. Moving along, let's go ahead and take a look at thearcan's reply to a user who had brought up this new damage mitigation bug that is now seemingly popping up again in New Horizon. Now, I want to preface this by saying, as someone who has played this game since launch, has logged in well over 1,300 hours, and have consistently played it pre-New Horizon and post-New Horizon, I have not noticed, and many of my friends who play the game as well, have not noticed this damage mitigation bug reoccurring. We're still taking the same amount of damage. We're not unnecessarily dying to anything via one-shot unless our one-shot protection cooldown is on cooldown. So what thearcan says is, when the damage mitigation problems first occurred, Reddit was aflame. They were trying to understand what was happening, but this doesn't appear to be the case here, and here meaning post-New Horizon. Nonetheless, Arcan actually went ahead and asked his analytics team to see if there was a change for new and endgame players for their lifespans, if they're longer or shorter since the launch of New Horizon. What he goes on to say is that there has been no difference in mean death counts or lifespans, even when looking on a class-by-class basis. This in combination with the lack of widespread outcry indicates to mean that the wider player base is not experiencing damage mitigation issue. While he says that they're still kind of looking into it, he believes that it's just most likely, not understanding how to correctly route a map, maybe, like I mentioned earlier, no synergies with the build, or just, running a suboptimal build for the challenge tier you are in. I hope that gives you guys a better understanding regarding damage mitigation and why sometimes it does feel like you get one-shotted because that one-shot protection is on cooldown. Let's go ahead and now talk about Borealis and its inconsistency. So when they first fixed Borealis to where it actually worked as a set bonus, because for the longest time the set bonus never worked consistently, there was a little bit of inconsistency with Borealis damage. And the quick fix was basically to unequip your set and re-equip it, and boom, you got your damage back. Now, ever since the weekly patches that PCF did before they went on a little bit of hiatus with working on New Horizon, one of those patches actually resolved this issue. They really didn't go into detail or note it at all. And if you recall in my in-depth Technomancer guide, I had actually mentioned that Borealis can be a little inconsistent at times. But after making that video, I think it was a patch a week or two after that or something like that, I never really noticed the issue being present. And I also noted in the description of my video that this issue is no longer present regarding the Borealis inconsistency. So even after New Horizon, this issue is still not there. Borealis has been consistent as ever. However, you may be wondering, well, Plato, why is it sometimes it feels like I'm doing 0 damage with Borealis? And guys, I'm glad you asked, because I covered this in my in-depth Technomancer video, but I'm going to go ahead and cover it here again. And that is effect resistance. Effect resistance, if you look at the in-game guide under enemies, is an ability that elites have to enter. Once they activate effect resistance, they become immune to all crowd control statuses, which include Ash, Freeze, and Slow. Freeze, the number 2 one, is what we're really focusing on here, is because when we have those T3 ultimate freezing bullets on our Borealis build, that is our most consistent way of applying freeze, and when enemies are in this effect resistant state, only elites by the way, you're going to be doing negative damage because all the freeze damage you have stacked up will not apply. So how does an enemy get into effect resistance? Well, effect resistance is activated when an enemy is affected by several crowd control effects or interrupts. So what does this mean? This means the freeze you're shooting from your absolute zero or your tactical AR with ultimate freezing bullets, Ash being applied by your pyro, time rift being applied by your trickster, earthquakes being procced by your devastators, even moaning winds, so on and so forth. Anything that affects crowd control or interrupts an elite in a short period of time will get them into that effect resistant state, which you can see by this blue tornado circle, and you'll see this blue aura all around them. And during that time, you can't apply freeze, so there goes all of your Borealis damage. Well, now you may be asking, well, why does it feel like sometimes I also do no damage to alphas and broodmothers? Well, I'm glad you asked, because alpha Porphyros are elites, even though they don't show up on the map. They are counted as elites in the game. And broodmothers, of course we know they're elites, but alpha Porphyros and broodmothers have this special ability called absorbing skin. And you can see this ability being procced when you see blue shells around the alpha Porphyros and the broodmothers. When they have absorbing skin procced, they are also in this effect resistant state where you have to first shoot off the absorbing skin, and even once you shoot off the absorbing skin, pay attention especially to broodmothers, you will still not be doing your full damage potential. That is because even once absorbing skin is removed, there is still a 1 to 3 second period where they're still immune to all effect resistance, including freeze. How do you know that a broodmother is suddenly out of this effect resistant state with the absorbing skin? When you shoot them, you will see this blue, little circular dome aura come off of them, like from their chest area or something. And once you see that blue aura come off, that means they're no longer in that absorbing skin effect resistant state, and you can immediately see your freeze damage apply. Like if you look at the icon above the broodmother, the second that absorbing skin effect resistant stage is gone, that freeze will apply. Boom, you have all of your Borealis damage back. So if you are noticing inconsistent damage with Borealis, it is because of effect resistance and absorbing skin from alphas and broodmothers. The absorbing skin doesn't really affect alphas as much as it affects broodmothers because of the alpha's health pool, so it's not a huge issue for alphas. Even if they're absorbing skin, you can still take them down without the freeze damage because you're a Technomancer and you pew pew fast enough. But with broodmothers, this problem is a bit more, what's the word I'm looking for here? Is a bit more troublesome because of the broodmother's increased health pool. And when you're in a trio scenario where the health pool is even more greatly increased, that's when you're going to start noticing that damage drop off. So as long as you learn how to play around effect resistance, learn how to kill broodmothers before they get into absorbing skin, or sometimes they're going to get their absorbing skin on, you can't avoid it, learn how to break the absorbing skin armor, wait for that blue circular aura to pop off out of the broodmother, and that's when you know your full damage of Borealis will apply. I hope that this video brings a bit more into light as to why you may be getting one-shotted, and why your Borealis damage may seem inconsistent at times. And as always, if you guys like my content, like, comment, subscribe, maybe hit that notification bell, and you can always catch me live on twitch.tv/PlatoBear. Thanks again, and as usual, peace.